It's fine. Relax. The weirdest moment in my evolution from movie fan to professional film critic, shut up, it is too a real job, was when I realized that I had been both totally wrong and totally right about the Star Wars prequels. Shut up again, that era is now as over as it's gonna get, you got your way, you can afford one more look back, alright? Viewed objectively, the prequels are bad films for the same reasons that plenty of other, substantially worse special effects blockbusters are bad films. Poorly scripted, badly acted, tonally askew, etc. But as a youngish fanboy back in the day, what really bugged me, and I feel a lot of people, was that they didn't feel Star Wars enough, by which I mean they didn't remain slavishly devoted to the aesthetic trappings I'd grown up obsessed with, and didn't throw out nearly enough references and callbacks and, well, Star Wars stuff. Whatever bad things you can say about The Phantom Menace, you can't accuse George Lucas of pandering to his audience. That was the next movie. My point is, I've long held a sneaky and depressing suspicion that if the prequels had been exactly as lacking on a technical filmmaking and storytelling level, but had also been suitably packed to the gills with the requisite amount of fan service, said fans would have largely overlooked those flaws and would still be arguing their quality today. And I'd been worried that I'd get a chance to test this hypothesis ever since it became clear that Disney and Lucasfilm were intent on selling The Force Awakens based almost entirely around proving that they'd been listening to the last decade plus of fanboy crying, with a pre-release hype machine that ignored almost all discussion of story, themes, or characters in favor of, we're using practical effects and models again, no midi-chlorians, X-Wings and TIE Fighters and Stormtroopers and the Falcon, Luke, Leia, Han, and Chewie are all back, please love us again, please! Heck, they even went so far as to hire J.J. Abrams, a remarkably unremarkable talent whose only skill set of genuine note is being an exceptional mimic of the style and feel of other people's movies. If there was ever going to be a recipe to make OG Star Wars fans spontaneously combust with joy regardless of whether or not a movie was actually any damn good, this was it.
Chewie, we're home.
But my hypothesis will have to wait for another day, because in spite of all that, and if we're being fair, probably because of some of it, Star Wars The Force Awakens is a pretty damn good movie, and since it in no way needed to be, I suppose that's damn impressive in its own right. Make no mistake though, what we've got here is effectively the world's first $200 million Star Wars fan film, and I don't use that designation to be flippant nor entirely critical. The Force Awakens is scratching a nostalgia itch out of pure profit motive, sure, but for good or ill, the attachment generations of filmgoers have to the sights, sounds, and characters of the original trilogy is a real, palpable thing that exists on a level above the base toy salesmanship that grew to feed off of it. Yes, the narrative is pretty much a leisurely stroll down memory lane with frequent detours onto Homage Avenue, but it mostly feels organic and natural about it, at least until you stop and start questioning the coincidences that have always been a big part of the series' storytelling, which it turns out is equal parts amusing and frustrating. Abrams isn't even half as clever a storyteller as he thinks he is, but he is pretty damn clever, and his sleight of hand trick here is to make both the cyclical nature of the Star Wars canon and a mad drive to relive and live up to the events of the original trilogy part of the subtext and metatext of the overall piece, inasmuch as our new bad guys, the First Order, appear largely to be a cult of Empire revivalists, while our heroes, and at least one villain, are consumed with finding and honoring the spirit of the exploits of Luke and company, which to them are the stuff of literal legend. Get it? This, depending on your point of view, either necessitates or allows for Abrams' most naked stroke of fan filmism, that the actual surface-level story of The Force Awakens is a deliberate, near blow-for-blow retread of the original Star Wars, as we once again concern ourselves with a droid who crash lands on a desert planet, carrying top-secret information regarding an old Jedi Master, a newly completed planet-destroying battle station, and a high-ranking villain in a black mask who's more personally invested than they're letting on. The film and filmmakers aren't simply playing with the original series' vintage toys, they're using them to reenact their favorite parts with their own tweaks and revisions. To be honest, if you can picture a modernized remake of the first movie, but where they actually knew the big revelations coming in Empire and could allude to them ad nauseum plus an admirable diversity boost to the main cast, you're a long way to knowing more or less what you're getting from Episode 7. With Abrams feeling clearly comfortable enough in his term-limited position as Star Wars fanboy king for a day to also find room for his own versions of mysterious uber-villain meant to be explained later, a character with a cool, instantly iconic look who gets a ton of build-up but ultimately doesn't really do anything, and an angry confrontation about paternity on an absurdly unsafe catwalk. I'd be lying if I said this level of reliance on mythic reference for gravity and scope doesn't start to wear thin at the seams. Abrams is leaning way more of his weight on George Lucas than George Lucas himself ever leaned on Joseph Campbell, but it eventually holds together and proves mostly able to stand up as its own thing thanks to one of the original trilogy lessons it seems to have committed most of all to heart. That a lot can be forgiven with compelling characters and a sense of humor. Daisy Ridley's Rey, John Boyega's Finn, and Oscar Isaac's Poe Dameron are all fun, engaging characters whose future exploits I'm already instantly looking forward to, and despite all the homage and allusion the plot puts them through, there is indeed a lot more to each of them than simply the Luke or the Han or the Leia from scene to scene. Boyega in particular essays a great likable everyman caught way above his head by his own good intentions. Ridley is compelling and strong, even while saddled with the unfortunate duty of having every word spoken by or about her coming branded with a footnote reading, "This will mean something in episode 8, but it's Isaac who pretty much walks away with every scene he's in, making probably the biggest and most instantaneous turn from good actor you've seen around to holy shit, this kid is a born movie star since... Well, yeah. And speaking of which, while they occasionally get right up to the line of it, the returning Hall of Famers acquit themselves admirably and largely avoid overstaying their welcome. Largely. But possibly the most interesting of all is Adam Driver as Kylo Ren, ostensibly the new wannabe Darth Vader. I say possibly because his storyline is another one that's clearly being left half-realized so it can be continued in the next movie, and also because it's not fully possible to talk about him without getting into a huge series of spoilers. Suffice it to say, I was profoundly intrigued to see Abrams and company introduce a character whose, no exaggeration, entire being feels conceived as a preemptive fuck you to whiny, entitled, backwards-looking, legacy-obsessed, easily enraged fanboy culture itself, think Superboy Prime, only to say, you know what, this will work better if we're subtle about it. Of all the characters new or old, his is the story I'm most interested in seeing play out further. If there's a weak link, and there is, it's in the writing. Not necessarily in the overall storytelling, the story they've got is fine, even if you can hear the gears turning a little too loudly as they attempt to reverse-engineer Lucas' original think-up-a-giant epic then tell one small part of it approach, although it does a fine job of using the fallout from casually revealed seemingly major plot detail that at first feels like it should have been a huge twist as a narrative smokescreen to conceal ultimately a bigger plot twist almost well enough that you'll be irritated with yourself during the credits when you start thinking, hey, wait a minute, that might be one astronomically massive coincidence too far.
Nobody exists on purpose. Nobody belongs anywhere. Everybody's gonna die. Come watch TV.
The problem rather comes in the dialogue, where too often a character's already perfectly clear reaction to something goes on several beats longer than it should while they lay out the emotional exposition for said reaction to a third party. There isn't too much of this, but there's enough that you start wondering if there's a joke being told that you just don't have the proper context for. Ultimately, I'm not sure that it's possible to give a fair and complete overview of The Force Awakens that will stand the test of time. Much like the prequels, it feels structured around a sense of pre-planned inevitability in a way that frustratingly obscures which moments of underwriting or plot holes are bugs of clunky screenwriting and which ones are features of setting up the next two movies. For example, don't go in expecting to find out why the First Order formed, how its buildup was accomplished, or what their grand scheme or unifying ideology is all about just yet. Their motivations remain about as vague as the Empire's were in the original Star Wars. For now, what I can say as a film critic is that if the stated goal here was to emulate the original 1977 film, mission accomplished. Both films are energetic, hugely enjoyable, visually spectacular space adventure romps from imaginative filmmakers who are probably better as technicians than auteurs that are immensely fun to watch and contain intriguing glimpses of a bigger world and more substantive story just beyond the frame. And if this commitment to emulation continues, then here's hoping next time we once again get the deeper, richer, more narratively satisfying sequel made by a better director, and they've already got that second part pretty much locked in. But as a Star Wars fan, yep, it's pretty goddamn awesome. In the end, my objectivity and detachment were no match for just how satisfying it was to see all the good stuff polished up like new and our old friends stepping back up to take their well-deserved bows, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't experience a visceral, powerful emotional response to a handful of big payoffs, even when you can see them coming from miles or years away. The Force Awakens has practically been genetically engineered in the vast Disney manufacturing collective to make longtime Star Wars fans shrug off the weight of prequel disappointment, get all misty-eyed, and gratefully declare Star Wars is back. And yeah, so be it. You know what? I'll say it. You guys win. Star Wars is back.